All right, the next um, element of life that I feel is really important is cells. So, all life, mostly, is based around the idea of cells. Um, there are also like viruses. Viruses are not cellular, and they're generally not considered to be alive, although that does have some dispute to it. Viruses can have some elements of life, but don't necessarily have all of the various elements of life. So, um, cellular basis for life is a major theme of biology, and it's a central focus in this course. It is the fundamental component of life, the fundamental concept that underlies life. It is the smallest component that is considered to be a living thing. There are some characteristics that all cells have in common, and some that are kind of optional. But all cells have a lipid membrane. All cells contain DNA as their genetic material. There are generally two types of cells, which I already mentioned a little bit: prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And the difference between them, I like to describe as being kind of like the difference between a studio apartment and like a one bedroom apartment. So a studio or an efficiency, you have like one room. It might be a pretty big room, it might be a small room, but like all of your living functions are all in there. So you usually have it. That doesn't mean that it's disorganized and you just do everything wherever. When I lived in a studio apartment back when I was in college, I had like a bed, and that was where I did sleeping stuff. And I had a desk, and that was where I did my computer stuff. And I had, a couch. A chair. I had a chair and a TV, and that was where I did my TV stuff. And then I had like a table. That was where I did my eating stuff. And then I also had this little kitchenette where I had like kind of a hot plate and a sink and some stuff like that. That was where I did my cooking stuff. There's no walls in between. So, like, I was doing different tasks depending upon where I was in my apartment. But there wasn't a clear dividing line, and sometimes things would spill from one place over to another. Sometimes I fell asleep on the chair. Sometimes I would take my food over to bed to eat it. Dishes got kind of piled up all over the place. So, I had to do all of the normal tasks of living. And I definitely had places for all of those tasks to take place. It was a little bit fuzzy exactly what happened where. And so that's more like prokaryotes. Prokaryotes have only one membrane. Mostly. They don't have any internal membranes. So they just have the membranes surrounding them. But they still have all of the basic functions that cells got to do in order to be cells. They have DNA, but instead of the DNA being inside of a component, it's bundled up in an area of the cell called the nucleoid. This is opposed to eukaryotes, which are more complicated. I compare them more to like a one bedroom apartment, where when I lived in a one bedroom apartment, I had a bedroom. That was where my bed was. I had a bathroom. I had a kitchen. I had a living room. Right? These different areas separated from each other with walls, and each is devoted to different tasks. Cells, eukaryotic cells, have internal separated components, what we call membrane-bound components, where they do different things. Like they might have a nucleus, which is where they keep their DNA. They might have a endoplasmic reticulum, which is a place where they make proteins. They got a lot of other internal compartments, and are thus much more complex and usually larger than prokaryotes. Karyon means nut or kernel. and is the word that we use for like the nucleus of a cell. So prokaryote means before nucleus. U in this case means true. So eukaryote means true nucleus. So prokaryotic cells are simpler, smaller, contain no internal compartments. They're usually bacteria, although it also includes archaea. Eukaryotic cells are subdivided by internal membranes into compartments, and these internal compartments are called organelles, which just means little organs. Generally, eukaryotes are larger and much more complex than prokaryotes are. And you can see here the relative size and complexity difference. Prokaryotes, usually smaller, simpler. DNA is going to be concentrated in what's called a nucleoid region, which is not separated by a wall or a membrane from the rest of the bacteria, but it is definitely an organized region. The DNA doesn't just spill everywhere, blah, 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 wherever at once. It is still kept fairly organized. Eukaryotic cells are larger, more complex. They have a membrane-bound nucleus that contains their DNA, and they have lots of different types of organelles doing different things. But usually each organelle is going to have a specialized task. So all cells use DNA as the chemical material of genes, which is what is inherited, what's passed on from one person to another, or from one bacteria to another. The language of DNA, so how DNA codes for traits, is common to all organisms. It's something that's universal. Humans use their DNA in pretty much the same way that bacteria do, that plants do, that fungi do. The genetic code is one of the few things that is pretty much universal throughout all life. And the language of DNA consists of these building blocks. It's a language that has 4 letters in it: A, G, C, and T. And these are abbreviations that stand for much longer words that you don't need to memorize.